I want to read you a children's book. You've all heard of Dr. Seuss, right? Everybody heard of Dr. Seuss?
Yeah.
And then I'll make some applications, but I'll just read through it first.
He wasn't a very good Christian.
So that it makes it. Well, I don't know, but he must have been thinking of urban ministry when he wrote this.
Oh.
Thidwick the Big-Hearted Moose. Okay? And some of you will see the applications before I even get very far. If you don't, I'll go back and briefly go through them and show them. Up at Lake Winnebago, the far northern shore, lives a huge herd of moose, about 60 or more. And they all go around in a big happy bunch looking for nice, tender moose moss to munch. Up at Lake Winnebago one day, they were lunching, just strolling along and enjoying their munching, for the moose moss that day was especially fine, when it happened that Thidwick, the last moose in line, saw a bingle bug sitting. The bug called out, "Hey, it's such a long road and it's such a hot day. Would you mind if I rode on your horns for a way?" "Of course not," smiled Thidwick, the big-hearted moose. "I'm happy my antlers can be of some use. There's room there to spare, and I'm happy to share. Be my guest, and I hope that you're comfortable there." So the bingle bug picked out a nice, easy seat, and the moose went on looking for moose moss to eat. Well, an hour or so later, the bug heard a squeak, and he heard the small voice of a tree spider speak. "I say," said the spider, "you've got a nice place. That moose seems quite friendly, has such a nice face. If I got on too, do you think he would mind?" "Hop aboard," laughed the bug, "and I think that you'll find that the moose won't object. He's the big-hearted kind." "I accept," said the spider with joy and delight, and he started a web on the horn to the right. While the spider was spinning, he heard a gay song, and a fresh little zinazoo bird came along. He stopped, and he stared, and he chirped, "Well, well, well, what a smart place to build. What a great place to dwell. I've been living on trees ever since I was born, but here's something new. Why not live on a horn? If there's room there for two, then there's room there for three. There's plenty of room," laughed the bug, "and it's free." Thidwick stopped walking. What was all that talking? These guests had caught Thidwick the moose unawares. "Hey," he called out, "what goes on there upstairs?" "Just building a nest, sir," the zinazoo said, and began yanking hairs out of poor Thidwick's head. And he plucked out exactly 204. "Don't worry," he laughed, "you can always grow more." Then he dozed off to sleep in his fine moose hair nest. "This bird," thought Thidwick, "is sort of a pest, but I'm a good sport, so I'll just let him rest. For a host, above all, must be nice to his guest. Besides, now it's getting quite late in the day, and surely tomorrow they'll all go away." But alas, the next morning, the sun's early light brought to Thidwick's sad eyes a most unwelcome sight. "Meet my wife," said the bird. "I was married last night. And perhaps, by the way, I should mention to you that our uncle is coming to live with us too. You're a very fine host, so I knew you'd be willing." Then the uncle, a woodpecker, started in drilling. All Thidwick's friends shouted, "Get rid of those pests." "I would, but I can't," sobbed poor Thidwick. "They're guests." "Guests indeed," his friends answered, and all of them frowned. "If those are your guests, we don't want you around. You can't stay with us because you're just not our sort." And they all turned their backs and walked off with a snort. Now the big friendless moose walked alone and forlorn, with 4 great big woodpecker holes in his horn. "What holes?" said Herman, a squirrel who spied them. "What holes to hide nuts in? Mind if I tried them?" "They're yours," called the woodpecker. "Get right inside them. This big-hearted moose runs a public hotel. Bring your nuts, bring your wife, bring your children as well." So the whole squirrel family all jumped on, pell-mell. And the very next thing the poor animal knew, a bobcat and turtle were living there too. Now what was the big-hearted moose going to do? Well, what would you do if it happened to you? You couldn't say scat, because that wouldn't be right. You couldn't shout scram, because that isn't polite. A host has to put up with all kinds of pests, for a host above all must be nice to his guests. So you'd try hard to smile, and you'd try to look sweet, and you'd go right on looking for moose moss to eat. But now it was winter, and that wasn't easy. For moose moss gets scarce when the weather gets freezy. The food was soon gone on the cold northern shore of Lake Winnebago. There just was no more. And all of Thidwick's friends swam away in a bunch to the south of the lake where there's moose moss to munch. He watched the herd leaving, and then Thidwick knew he'd starve if he stayed here. He'd have to go too. He stepped in the water. Then, oh, what a fuss. "Stop!" screamed his guests. "You can't do this to us. These horns are our home, and you've no right to take our home to the far distant side of the lake." Be fair, Thidwick begged with a lump in his throat. We're fair, said the bug. We'll decide this by vote. All those in favor of going say aye. All those in favor of staying say nay. Aye, shouted Thidwick, but when he was done, nay, they all yelled. He'd lost 11-1. We win, screamed the guests by a very large score, and poor starving Thidwick climbed back on the shore. Then you know what those pests did. They asked in some more. They asked in a fox who jumped in from the trees. They asked in some mice, and they asked in some fleas. They asked a big bear in, and then, if you please, came a swarm of 362 bees. Poor Thidwick sank down with a groan to his knees, and then came something that made his heart freeze. Bullets came zinging right past Thidwick's face. Guns were banging all over the place. Get that moose, Thidwick heard a voice call. Fire again and again, and shoot straight, one and all. We must get his head for the Harvard Club wall. Thidwick took to his heels with that load on his head. With 500 pounds on his horns, the moose fled. He could have run faster without all those pests, but a host above all must be nice to his guests. Up canyon, up cliff, over wild rocky trail, with bullets bouncing around him like hail. Up gully through gulch and down slippery sluice, with his hard-hearted guests raced the soft-hearted moose. Then finally they had him. Because of those pests, he had run out of luck. Because of those guests on his horns, he was stuck. He gasped. He felt faint, and the whole world grew fuzzy. Thidwick was finished completely. Or was he? Finished? Not Thidwick. Decidedly not. It's true he was in a most terrible spot, but now he remembered a thing he'd forgot. A wonderful something that happens each year to the horns of all moose and the horns of all deer. Today was the day Thidwick happened to know that old horns come off so that new ones can grow. And he called to the pests on his horns as he threw them. You wanted my horns, now you're quite welcome to them. Keep them, they're yours. As for me, I shall take myself to the far distant side of the lake. And he swam Winnebago and found his old bunch and arrived just in time for a wonderful lunch at the south of the lake where there's moose moss to munch. His old horns today are where you knew they would be. His guests are still on them, all stuffed as they should be. Now, you might be wondering, what in the world? But notice how it started, okay? The bingo bug happens along, and he says, can you give me a ride? Remember that? Yeah. And Thidwick smiled, oh, of course, no problem. Because that was giving such a small thing. He could be generous, and no terms were necessary, right? Didn't need to require anything of this little bingo bug. And so he feels like he's being very generous, and he can do it, and there's no reason to ask any questions, no reason to require anything. But then, the next person, the next animal that moved in was the spider. Who invited him in? The bingo bug, not the moose. And so already the terms of a relationship have disappeared. The new guests don't come in because of a relationship with the moose. They come in because of a relationship with the previous people, the other people who are getting benefit. And it's given freely. The bingo bug has no stake in this at all. And so he said, remember what he says, hop on, it's free. Well, to him, it's totally free. He has no concept of how these resources are provided, where they come from, how they are produced. It's easy for him to be generous. And he assumes that there's no need to even discuss any cost with the host. No need to even talk to the moose about any kind of terms. Now they're receiving it as a free gift. And then notice Thidwick stops at one point. He hears the talking. He's surprised at what it has turned into. Have you ever been surprised? Oh, where did these people all come from? You're surprised at what it's turned into. And it could be in your own house. Okay? You're helping people out. And suddenly there are people there that you did not invite in even. They didn't come in because of relationship with you. It has become a public thing. It's become a program. It's become a program that does not require relationship. And then they are disrespectful, like pulling out the hairs, starting to do damage, because they had no relationship to the host. And so they feel no obligation to the host. He was not the one. They don't feel any sense of anybody sacrificing for them. It's just there. And so now he's in an awkward position because he doesn't know what to say, doesn't know how to deal with this, because he's still dealing in terms of courtesy, and they're not. And so now it says he continues. He's assumed the role of a host, but they're not really in the role of guests. They're just freeloaders. They're just camping out there. And so what does he do? He says, I'll just, nightfall comes on. Maybe tomorrow they'll leave. And by the way, time does not usually solve relationship problems or people problems. Hoping for them to go away usually is disappointing, right? Maybe something will happen. Maybe they'll have to go back to Detroit, or maybe they'll have to, you just hope for some kind of circumstances to deal with the problem because you don't know how to deal with it relationally. And then it says he just goes on looking for moose moss to munch. And so acting like things are normal. Have you ever had to try to act like some things were normal when they were actually outrageous? Okay? Walk through your living room and there are 4 or 5 people laying there playing a video game, and you're still scrounging up the resources. And you have to go on, and you are the one that has to say, excuse me, as you make your way through your house. Now, it may not be your house. Maybe your church. It might be something else that you've started. And so it keeps adding. And look at the reaction of his friends. Okay? His less generous friends are saying, what are you doing? This is stupid. This is crazy. You're letting them take advantage of you. Anybody ever told you that?
Yeah.
Now, it would be easy to be disgusted at those friends and say, well, you guys just don't care. You guys just don't have the compassion like I have. We're supposed to help people with these needs, right? Now, it may be that they don't have the compassion that they ought to have, but their observation is right. Their observation that you are digging yourself into a situation that you will not be able to solve is true. Now, maybe they stay too much at a distance of the problem. Maybe they don't want to get involved because they don't care enough, but they're right when they say, you're getting yourself into all this and there's no end to it, there's no resolution to this, there's no way these problems are going to be solved. And so there would be no way. Fidwick could not recruit them and say, you know what, guys, I'm carrying a really heavy load here. If we could just spread some of these passengers out on some of these other mooses around here, that would really help, right? He didn't even try for that. But that wouldn't have solved it. More resources and more people to carry the load wouldn't solve it because the load would continue to multiply. The problem was a relational problem. He had not formed a true group. Okay, this was not a group of people, and it was not sustainable. Now, he walks forlorn, and the more, the holes are drilled, the thing is deteriorating, other agendas are being brought in because people didn't come in with an agreement on the agenda. And so, then they even vote on something. Imagine that. The resources are all coming from one. But they vote. It's a little bit like, even worse though, than say you have a factory with 500 employees and they get to vote when they're going to work. They get to vote how they do things when really one person pays all their salaries. And whatever happens doesn't affect their salaries until the factory goes out of business. Until then. And then what are they going to do? They'll go get a job somewhere else. If Fidwick collapsed under this and could not continue, they would all get off and go somewhere else. He would be the only one that would pay any price. And yet they voted. And so when it comes time, he needs to move to this new area, they vote. And so they have an influence, they have a voice, even though they have no responsibility at all. And this was when a crisis came up, and that's the way it always happens in a ministry. When do we stop and review our philosophy? When the resources are low. Mm-hmm. When we can't afford to do it anymore is when we stop and wonder if it's what we should be doing anyway. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. Are we doing it wrong? Is there something wrong about what we're how we are doing. And instead of just trying to get more money to do this, maybe we should be thinking about whether we should be doing it anyway, or should we be doing something else. It's a lack of money. Unfortunate, it's unfortunate that that's the way it is, but often it's a lack of money that makes us rethink how we are doing things. And so, of course, though, the vote, because it was functioning in some ways like a group, in influence, control, voting, but not functioning like a group in taking any responsibility. And so, here's the challenge. If you go into a place and you're trying to form a committed group who will be the church in that place, but the resources are all brought in with you. We're going to pay for this. We're going to rent this place. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to help people. And so you form a group of people who are all recipients. They don't have to commit to anything. And so, you're lucky if you can get them to help mop or wash dishes. I remember one girl, I asked her, we were at Victory Chapel after the meal one day. I said, Danielle, if you'll help wash dishes today, next Sunday, the meal will be free. She said, it's always free, which of course was true. But it made me realize there's something wrong with our system here. And we shortly after that organized a system where the jobs were handed out. Sam got to be the enforcer for some of that, handing out those jobs. But we actually turned some people away after they had been there a few times to eat. And then I would approach them before the meal and say, are you going to be able to help with? No, I don't want to do that. One guy's Chris, was his name. And he usually would just come about 5 minutes before the service was over anyway, stand in the back, and then go down and eat. So after he'd come about 3 or 4 times, we always welcomed people, never turned anybody away the first time. But after several times, I said, Chris, I need you to help do the mopping today. Well, he says, if you're going to pay me. And I said, well, Chris, you've been eating, we're not paid. None of us are getting paid to do these things. We eat together and then we do the work. Well, no. I said, okay, well, unless you change your mind, don't get in line to eat. And he was angry. He threatened me, actually, but he left. I never saw him again. Now, did we fail with Chris? I don't know. We fed him 3 times. He got to hear the last 5 minutes of my message about 3 times. I don't know. But, I remember one time we were unloading a truck, moving into the building down there where we moved down to the place we bought. We're unloading a truck. And this guy comes by and he's needing a couple dollars for something. And so as I am walking back and forth carrying stuff out of the truck, he walks beside me, empty-handed, back and forth. I go to the truck, get a load of stuff, carry it in. He walks beside me. All the way down, he walks by, explaining his need for $2. And I'm thinking, God, why don't you at least observe what's going on here and just pitch in and be involved, carry some stuff. And there were a lot of people that did that too. But, if he just said, hey, guys, you unload this truck, let me help. I would know what was in the back of his mind, but I'd still be a little more favorable than just a guy who doesn't even observe that there's work going on.